This is Big Tasty Sports.
If you're new to my stuff, you may not know that a big focus for me is futures, especially in the NFL, though I'll be looking at some of that for college basketball here before too long as well. It's just an area where I believe that there are better edges to be found than often exist in week-to-week markets because those get dialed in much more quickly. A lot of the futures markets are getting more dialed in now than they were a month or 2 months ago. But I have focused primarily on team futures to this point. Yanni and I did a show a little while back on some player futures. But tonight I want to share what I think is an edge, and I'm starting to put my money where my mouth is. This is something, if you've watched previous videos, Yanni and I have talked about this some, but I'm going to make the case for something that has been blasphemy when it comes to player props, and that is betting some overs. Why would I do that? Now, there's no doubt that in the past, unders have been profitable. To be honest, I haven't done a lot with player prop futures in the past. I mean, I've looked at them and I bet a few unders before, but definitely I've listened to a lot of people and gone pretty deep dive into some of that. And I know that historically unders on player prop futures have been profitable. Why is that? Well, number one, I think people like to bet overs. So there's that bias baked in. And if you're going to bet overs, you got to reckon with that because we like to see players perform. We, especially the players that we like, we want to think that they are going to go off. But and so I think lines can get inflated, and that can happen during the season as well. Though I think those in-season player prop lines, that's not happening as much anymore either because the books have gotten a lot wiser than when they first started posting player props for like every freaking player in the league. The other reason, though, that it's been wise and profitable to bet unders on player props is injuries. Pretty obvious, right? I mean, you have one outcome, well, more than one, because you have the outcome that a player gets hurt for the majority of the season. I mean, we've already seen injuries happen in the preseason that are going to linger on into the season or even keep people out, and that happens every year. There are a significant number of NFL players every season who are going to get season-ending injuries, and when that happens, you're under hits, right? Unless you're in week 16 or 17 or something. But there's also the case of a player who is nicked up, as they say, which usually means you're actually pretty significantly injured, but you can just play through it. So their performance is lower, and maybe they end up sitting out 4, 5, 6, 7 games. So they play through the entire season, but they don't play up to their potential. All of those outcomes favor unders. And so if you're going to make the case for betting overs, you absolutely have to take that into account. Am I taking it into account? Well, you can be the judge of that. But the more that I have looked at the way that these markets are set on player props and going through division by division, we've been doing these division previews. Encourage you to go watch those if you haven't. If you're interested in NFL, it's a fun way to get up to speed on all the teams one division at a time. Doing those, what I found is an ability to really look into what should be happening with usage, with run percentage, pass percentage, where teams are compared to last year, and you start to get a sense of where these players should come out. And as I did that and I was looking at my projections for where I expected players to fall, I started to notice a pretty massive discrepancy on many lines, not all of them. And we're going to get into some, by the way, we're going to get into some specific lines, and I got 2 free bets that I have made at the end. So you can even skip ahead to that if you want, whatever, if you're not interested in the rest of this stuff, but that is what's coming up. So anyway, there's this discrepancy between where the lines are being set and what I think is reasonable for projections on a lot of these players. What I believe has happened is that the books have tuned into the fact that they've gotten hammered on unders in the past. And what generally happens in betting markets or markets in general is you have a market set in one place. And when that market gets hammered, there is a reaction from the market, from the bookmakers, to swing it the other way to make up for the losses that they're taking in a specific way. And one of the edges that still can be found, though it is rare in sports betting because the bookmakers are really good for the most part, to be honest, is when that swing happens, you have to hit it right away. And that's the reason why I've been thinking about making this video for a little while, and I was like, man, do I really want to go all in on this being the year to play some overs? But the reality is, if this is the year to play some overs, by next year, these opportunities will not be available. In fact, some of the line movement that's happened, I would say that we're starting to see books correct already. And so if you want to get on board with some overs and you believe there is an edge there, as I do, now is the time. Now, certainly you still have to be discriminate about which ones you're playing. You want to really understand what's going on with different teams and different players. You don't want to just go playing an over on everything. You want to understand even players that are coming into the season with injuries and what are the chances of them being re-injured. I'll shout out a few podcasts here that have been great on this lately. On Establish the Run, Adam Levitan interviewed oh crap, now the name's gonna escape me, and that sucks. A woman who is very knowledgeable in the medical field, and Stefania Bell, that's who it is. Man, that was escaping me. Anyway, he interviewed her and they talked about a lot of these injuries and the specifics of the procedures and what it looks like to come back from those. Pat Mayo just did one on the Pat Mayo experience where it was a very similar thing. And then Establish the Run does this one division at a time. They have a guy who comes on and talks about these injuries. So go check out those podcasts if you're interested in getting information about the injuries that players have and how they're likely to come back. Are they more likely to get injured? Some of these players, even their injuries where when they first come back, their play is likely to be diminished. But then as they get further away from the injury, they're likely to return to form or not. So if you're interested, encourage you to do that. I'm taking that into account with what I'm going to share with you here. But my belief is that even factoring in the possibility of injuries, these lines are so depressed that if you find the right spots and spread some bets across multiple player props, that you are much likelier to have a positive return than a negative one. We say it all the time, whatever it's sports betting, you can always lose. No locks here, and there never will be. But I think this is a place where there's an edge. And if you disagree, let me know why. That's fine. Call me an idiot. That's no problem. But I think what you have to wrestle with if you think there's not is markets do swing back to account for prior losses. And you have to hit those markets then. You can't wait, because if you wait, they recover, and then the opportunity isn't there anymore. And so I think it's there. Is it really? We'll find out at the end of the season, I guess. So what I want to do next is I'm going to walk you through just some stuff that I've compiled here. These are my player prop sheets. I have, some different yardage totals. I'm going to be doing all yardage here. I mean, if you want to get into TD props, different things like that, that's cool too, of course. But today I'm just going to be talking about yardage. And I'm going to highlight some people. And then at the end, like I said, I'll have a couple things that I've already bet. I actually have bet some others, but I'll talk about that at the end too. All right, so first of all, let's go here and let's look at Dak Prescott pass yards. You can see here that the pass yards range anywhere from 3,875.5 all the way up to 4,050.5. So there is a little bit of range, and this is why it's important to shop around as well. In 2019 and 2021, he had 4,900 yards and 4,450 in 16 games. So that wasn't even in 17. Now, last year would have been an under, and that's an under on this year's total, so the 3,875. So is Dak Prescott over on yardage a good bet? Well, I think it's definitely worth considering, at least, because the Cowboys, if anything, I think will be heavier on passing this year than they have been in the past. Tony Pollard is dynamic out of the backfield, but he always also catches the ball really well. They don't have Ezekiel Elliott, at least for now. Maybe they'll sign him back. But even if they do, he's probably not going to get as much. Well, he's not going to get as much time. And so I think they're going to depend on the run less. And when Dak is healthy and protected, he can sling it around. I mean, he had a lot of interceptions last year, but that was an outlier. I think this team is going to be throwing the ball. They have a good offensive line. They added Brandon Cooks. They get Michael Gallup back off an injury. Yes, they lose Dalton Schultz, but I think this should be a really dynamic passing attack. And so when you look at a line being set, in one case, 650 yards short of a total from the last 3 years where he actually had 16 games, and in another case, 1,000 yards short. You have a massive buffer there. I mean, if they're really throwing the ball and he plays 13 or 14 games, he probably goes over this total. So I think that's one to consider. Another one we could consider here is Derek Carr. He goes from the Raiders to the Saints, and his passing total, again, there's a range, but on the low end, it's 3625 and a half. There is all the way up to 3800 and a half. He's gone over 4,000 yards every year but two in his career. Let that sink in. Again, if you had this total, 3625, and had bet the over, well, I'd actually have to double check. He may have gone over it another year, but he's gone over 4,000 every year but two. You would have won it all of those years. Now, he loses Devontae Adams, no doubt, but he played behind a pretty trash offensive line last year and was constantly under pressure. New Orleans' offensive line isn't phenomenal, but they play in the NFC South. The NFC and then the NFC South on top of that, they're just not going to face the defenses that the Raiders have to face on a game-in, game-out basis. And the offensive line should be a little bit better than what he had with the Raiders. He loses Devontae Adams, but it's not a bad receiving core. Chris Olave is definitely emerging. We'll see if Michael Thomas can stay healthy. You know, I expect this team to pass the ball a decent amount, and I expect Derek Carr to do what he's done before, which is probably to get somewhere around that 4,000-yard mark. I'm not going to say this every time, of course, barring injury. I said at the beginning, if you're going to bet overs, you are betting that major injuries don't happen. But this is another one, and this is a principle I've been starting to look at, is I think this is another one where he could miss games and still go over. He could not miss a lot of games, but he could miss games. And those are the bets I'm being drawn to, is where I believe someone could miss 3 games, 4 games, and still hit their over. So that's another one. All right, I think that's it. That's it that I had for the quarterbacks to talk about. Let's talk about some running backs. This gets really interesting. First up, we're going to talk about Brian Robinson Jr. The Washington Redskins do not have a phenomenal offensive line, and Brian Robinson Jr. is not explosive. No doubt. Let's just name those things up front. But his total is sitting at 725 and a half rushing yards. Again, with DraftKings, you go all the way up to 800 and a half. 75 yards is a big difference. I mean, that could be the difference of a game. So this is why you got to shop around. But last year when he played, he was around 17 carries a game, and he averaged 3.9 yards per carry. Now, what I think is that if anything, his share of the carries is going to go up, not down, and he missed games. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Sorry. I can't understand my own notes sometimes. I don't know if any of you ever have that. I like write it in shorthand so that I can understand it, but then I don't understand. Anyway, he would only need to play 11 games at that pace to go over the total here of 725 and a half. Again, 17 carries a game, 3.9 yards per carry. If he plays 15 games, that's 900. It's basically 1,000 yards. So you're over it by 275 yards almost. If he plays 15 games, we're not even talking about 17. Also, you could say, well, what if his yards per carry go down a little bit because the offensive line is bad? Okay. Well, as long as it doesn't drop off a cliff to like 3 yards a game, we're still okay. This is one where I think it's worth considering. Again, because if he can just maintain what he's done in the past, he doesn't even have to play a full season to get to this mark. Next up is one that Yanni brought up, so I want to give him all the credit for this one. I will just say here that I agree with him that Derrick Henry is worth a look. He could decline in yards per carry or games or carries per game, and he'd still go over this mark of 1150 and a half. He's done it every year except for one, and that year he played 8 games, so it was the injury that got him. Derrick Henry is getting a little bit older, but he doesn't seem to be slowing down, and I think they're still going to rely on him a decent amount in Tennessee. And again, he's in a fairly weak division with the Colts and the Texans. He gets to play each of them twice. I just think he's going to have lots of opportunity to have some big games as he's done in the past. And if he does that, he probably blows by 1150 and a half. So again, based on historical performance and his durability, this seems low. James Cook is another one. I won't talk about every single one of these, but James Cook with the Bills, this is a guy that I think has a chance to be pretty dynamic and should get a bigger part of the workload this year. His total is only 700.5. DraftKings is the only one that has it right now. He had 507 yards in 15 games last year, but he carried the ball 5.5 times per game. I mean, they picked up Damian Harris, and so yes, maybe this is a split backfield, but I think James Cook is the lead back here. And if he is, it's hard for me to not imagine him not getting at least 10 carries a game. And if he does that and plays again 14, even 13 games, he goes over 750.5. So this is another one that looks like it should go well over if he plays as is projected. All right, let's talk about just a couple more here. Rachaad White in Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa Bay is in rough shape, but their offensive line is still okay. Their quarterback situation is horrific. So I think they're going to have to try to run the ball and play defense. That's got to be the game plan there. And Rachaad White looks like the lead back. On MGM, his total is 674.5. At 3.9 yards per carry and 15 carries a game, he would only need 11.5 games to get there. Again, adjust the numbers if you want. Give him a little less on yards per carry. Give him a few less carries per game. We're still talking about a buffer here of 4, 5, 6 games with him at that performance level to go over this mark. Now, he's a little bit more unproven as a younger player, but based on what's coming out of camp and what's expected of him, that number is low. Last one I'll talk about here on the running backs is Tony Pollard. Expected to have a really explosive year this year. He is coming into the season off an injury, but this is where listening to those people who know what they're talking about on injuries is important. Every person that I've heard talk about this who knows what they're talking about, at least supposedly, thinks that he should not have much of an elevated risk of re-injury, and he should pretty much be at 100% in terms of his ability to make plays. You can get his total at 950.5 at BetOnline. This is where I talk about that line movement. It was minus 105 4 days ago. It's minus 125 already now. So it's already moving. He averaged, I believe it was a little over 5 yards a carry last year. Now he's going to be expected to carry more of the load. So maybe that comes down some. But again, this is a team that's going to be able to pass the ball too. So they're not going to be able to stack the box on Tony Pollard. If he gets 4.8 yards per carry and only 13 carries a game, and remember, he's the featured back now, he'd need 15.2 games to go over this total. Now, that's getting close to 17, right? And so we got to be a little bit careful there. But I think 13 carries a game is extremely conservative. So another one worth considering. All right, let's do receivers quick. And we, again, will not do all the receivers. But we will do some of them here. Let's talk about Darren Waller. Darren Waller is on a team where he probably, if he plays up to his potential, is the best receiving threat on the Giants. Most of their receivers are mid-tier, and so I think Darren Waller, if he can stay healthy, has the ability to have a really big year, and his total on FanDuel for receiving yards is 625.5. That is a very okay year for a good tight end. And I think Darren Waller has a chance to be sort of in that upper tier of tight end. I mean, not Travis Kelce like, but, that upper third, at least, of the tight ends in the league. They're going to need to rely on him. And so that is one that I think is worth considering. Let's drop down here. Another one is Gabe Davis. This one, I'm actually not going to talk about too much now because we're going to be doing the AFC East divisional breakdown, and I'm guessing that this is one we'll talk about more in depth in terms of that Bills offense. So I'm going to save it a little bit, but I will just say for now, if Gabe Davis can have a good year as the number 2 receiver on a prolific offense, 725.5 yards is not a lot of yards. All right, let's scroll on down and see what else we got. You can see I have a lot of stuff marked here. And again, I mean, there's a lot more I'm considering or even betting than what I'm able to get into, but just wanting to walk through some of these. Another one that's really interesting to me is Nico Collins. This is a Houston Texans team that doesn't have many receiving weapons. And we talked about on the divisional breakdown how Nico Collins would be a phenomenal number 2 receiver for somebody. He's got a good body type, pretty good route runner, yeah, just a good overall receiver, I would say. Solid. Not a dynamic number one, but he's going to be the number one receiver on this team. And if you look at his first two seasons, he had 446 yards and 481 yards, but he only played 14 games and then 10 games with shitty QB play, is what I wrote down here with Davis Mills for the most part. Last year, he was on pace to go over this year's total, which is 585 and a half. In 13 games, he would have gone over it. Well, now he gets CJ Stroud, who's unproven for sure, but certainly a better natural passer than Davis Mills is. And he's going to have to be the number one receiver on this team, even on a team that isn't very good and probably is going to want to lean on the run as much as they can. 585 and a half is dramatically low for a number one receiver on a team where I think CJ Stroud's going to be able to throw the ball some, especially if they're behind too, and they're just having to throw the ball to try to catch up. Man, that's a great script for Nico Collins to go over this total. So that's one that I think is worth considering. Let's see. One other one here is Treylon Burks. So obviously the Titans bring in DeAndre Hopkins, and that you could say that that's going to take targets away from Treylon Burks, and it may, because Treylon Burks was going to have to be the number one receiver. But the other way to look at it is that it's going to assist him because it's going to pull the best coverage on a team away from him to DeAndre Hopkins, and maybe he's more open. This is a guy that I personally believe has tremendous upside. I mean, his body type, some of the catches that he made, this guy has the chance to be a really good NFL receiver. Whether he will be or not, we'll see. But last year, and this was with Ryan Tannehill out a lot of the year. I mean, just terrible, terrible quarterback play. And this year, at least they have Will Levis as a backup who can at least throw it a little bit, who I imagine would play over Malik Willis. He had 444 yards in just 11 games. And his over-under is sitting at 675 and a half. I mean, if this guy can put together most of an entire season with an actual NFL quarterback, I just got to say again, doesn't look too bad. All right. I've talked about sacks on some other podcasts, so that's mostly what I have on the defense tab here, so I am not going to talk about sacks. Let's go to two bets that I have already made. Before I do that, I do just want to, this is the little commercial. So futures are what I'm majoring on. If you go to bigtastysports.com, click NFL futures, you'll see everything that I'm doing there. And if you subscribe, it's $10 a month for all of my bets. Content, some of the content is just for subscribers. You'll be able to see the spreadsheets that I have. Part of my goal is to provide you with tools to be able to make your own decisions too. I mean, I'm going to be transparent and tell you what I'm doing. You can see the entire spreadsheet of all the bets I've made with the line I bet it at and the current line. So you can see how those have moved. It's been very positive so far. I created an NFL dashboard that has over-unders and my projections and division lines and all that stuff. The best lines across 5 books that I'm updating on a weekly basis, and we'll do multiple times during the season. All that to say, there is a lot of stuff there for you to be able to use, not just to bet what I'm betting, which you can do if you want, but also to look at it and make your own decisions. You think I'm full of shit on how a team's going to be, that's fine. But you can still benefit from the line shopping that I'm doing for you and some of the other metrics that you can access, strength of schedule, a whole other host of things. So if you want to get all of these player future bets, go to bigtastysports.com, click NFL futures, and you can sign up there to get everything. But let's get to two bets that I have made. The first one is Nick Chubb over 1,200 and a half rush yards, minus 112 on FanDuel. And I played this to win a unit. Both of these I played to win a unit. So Nick Chubb, I'm just going to pull up my notes here on him. I mean, really, to some extent, you don't need notes. Like, let the market speak. Nick Chubb is the favorite to lead the league in rushing. The leader in the league in rushing is not going to have 1,200 yards. Nick Chubb is the back in Cleveland now. Kareem Hunt is gone. No, they have some youth behind him, but I mean, this is going to be the man. And they have a phenomenal offensive line, so they're going to be able to run the ball. I think they have a solid defense, but I think they're going to want to control things a little bit. And Nick Chubb, I believe I heard this. You can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. One of 3 players ever to average over 5 yards a carry. I mean, when this guy touches the ball, he gains yards. And he's also pretty durable. So while anybody can get injured, I think Nick Chubb is a guy that plays the majority of the season, barring something catastrophic. I think 1,200.5 yards is going to look kind of ridiculous. I think it's very likely that Nick Chubb pushes up toward even 1,500. So over 1,200.5 rush yards on Nick Chubb at minus 112, I think is great value, which is why I bet it. The second bet that I have already made is Ramondre Stevenson over 925.5 rush yards at minus 112 on FanDuel. Now, this is a total that I believe Ramondre has not eclipsed. Let's see. I don't have it written down here. But basically, at 3.5 yards per carry and 15 carries a game, he would need 14.8 games to get over this total. Let me ask you this. Will he only average 3.5 yards per carry? Okay, that's possible. I can give you that one. Though I think he's going to be above that. I think he gets up to the 3.8, 3.9. I think he'll be better on the yards per carry. But is he really going to have 15 carries a game? I absolutely think not. I mean, this offense, the skill position players on this offense are pretty atrocious. There's Hunter Henry, but I mean, would we be talking about how great Hunter Henry is on a team that had anything besides total crap at the skill position? He's a fine player. He's a good tight end, but he's not some absolutely dynamic receiver or tight end that's just going to own people. Ramondre Stevenson proved himself last year. This is a team that absolutely is going to have to rely on their defense, and they are not going to want to put their defense in bad positions over and over again. So I think Ramondre Stevenson gets a ton of work in New England. I think not only will he get 15 carries a game, but I think he gets up around 20, maybe 20 plus carries a game. And if that is the case, 925.5 on the rushing yards is extremely low. This is one also where the line shopping matters, because you have 925.5 at FanDuel, but then it's 975.5 at BetOnline, 1,000.5 at DraftKings. I think there's a good chance he gets over all of those for sure. But hey, why not take the lower line? So over 925.5 rush yards for Ramondre Stevenson is the second bet. All right. Like I said, check out BigTastySports.com. If you would like to get more, please do drop a like and comment. Let me know. Man, if you have some overs you like, I would love to hear what you're thinking. Or tell me some unders you like. I think there are actually some unders out there that are worth considering as well. So that is it for the case for the overs. Let me know if you like it or if I'm crazy. I'll talk to you later.